The alarm screams. You jolt awake, the screen blares, you drag your exhausted body out of bed to face the machinery of another day. Maybe you fight through an hour of crawling traffic just to sit under harsh fluorescent lights. Or perhaps you live out in the countryside, running a small family business right out of your own home. You spend the whole day managing inventory for a clothing shop with your spouse. You try to build an online digital business on the side. You navigate endless provincial tax regulations just to keep the doors open. You deal with customers. You calculate margins. You push yourself relentlessly until the sun disappears. You pay the bills. You collapse into bed. You do it all over again. You call this the modern life. You view this endless cycle as a grand achievement of human progress, a massive upgrade from the dirt and the danger of the deep past. You look back at the people who lived in caves, and you feel a profound sense of relief. You think you are the lucky one because you do not have to chase down wild game with a sharpened stick just to secure your dinner. I know exactly what you are thinking. You think our ancestors lived in a state of constant, agonizing desperation. But let me tell you a secret. If a prehistoric hunter-gatherer could somehow step out of a time machine and look at your daily planner, they would be absolutely horrified. They would look at your 8-hour shifts and your endless side hustles. They would think you are a prisoner. Because the brutal reality is that in order to simply feed yourself and keep a roof over your head, you are currently working twice as hard as a caveman. Maybe even 3 times as hard. Let us take a step back and completely forget this little hallucination we call civilization. Human beings, anatomically modern humans, have been walking around on this planet for roughly 300,000 years. For the vast majority of that enormous stretch of time, the concept of a work week did not even exist. The idea of clocking in, pushing through a mid-afternoon slump, and waiting desperately for the weekend is an incredibly new invention. The reality you are living right now, the schedules and the constant rushing, is nothing more than a tiny statistical error in the long timeline of our species. It is a system glitch. We need to talk about them. The ancestors. You have been sold a lie about how they actually lived. Pop culture paints their existence as a blood-soaked arena where every single day was a desperate fight against starvation and the elements. But when you look closely at the historical record, a completely different picture emerges. To them, the natural world was not a terrifying deathmatch. It was a massive supermarket, a place bursting with resources, open all the time, completely free. This is not just some romantic daydream about the good old days. The science backs it up. In the middle of the 20th century, an anthropologist named Marshall Salins completely shattered our modern understanding of human history. He published a groundbreaking theory called the Original Affluent Society, and it made the entire academic world deeply uncomfortable. Salins and other researchers actually went out to observe the few remaining hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth, like the Hadza in Tanzania or the San people in the Kalahari Desert. They wanted to see exactly how much effort it took to survive outside of the modern economic machine. The numbers they found were absolutely staggering. How long do you think they spent hunting and gathering food? 10 hours? 12 hours? The answer is roughly 3 to 5 hours a day. That is it. That translates to maybe 15 to 20 hours a week of actual, necessary labor to sustain a human life. The rest of the time, the environment simply provided what they needed. They knew exactly where the wild tubers grew in the damp soil. They tracked the migration of the herds across the plains. They understood the seasonal cycles of the deep forests with a level of intimacy that we cannot even begin to comprehend today. But the craziest part is not how little they worked. It is what they did with all that empty space in their days. Think about the mechanics of their daily lives. They did not have refrigerators or deep freezers. They had absolutely no way to store perishable food for long periods, which meant there was zero incentive to hoard resources or build up massive surpluses of wealth. Once they gathered enough calories for the tribe to eat that specific day, they just stopped working. They put down their spears. They dropped their gathering baskets. They rested. So what did they do with those massive stretching hours of free time? They cooked slow meals over crackling open fires. They played endlessly with their children in the dirt. They sat around and gossiped about the other members of the tribe. They carved intricate designs into fragments of bone and pale wood. They sang. They told stories. And they slept. They took incredibly long, luxurious naps in the middle of the afternoon. Everything was perfectly balanced. A beautiful equilibrium. A quiet existence. And then we locked ourselves inside a cage of our own making. Around 10,000 years ago, the ultimate villain of the human story arrived on the scene. We call it the agricultural revolution. History books teach us to celebrate this massive pivot in human behavior. We are incredibly proud of the fact that we supposedly mastered nature and bent the wild earth to our will. We domesticated wheat, we tamed rice, we corralled the potatoes. But if you strip away the arrogance of modern humanity and look closely at the fossil evidence, A very disturbing question arises. Did we domesticate wheat, or did wheat actually domesticate us? Suddenly, the basic rules of human survival completely changed. We had to clear the ancient forests. We dragged heavy plows through the stubborn dirt. We planted tiny seeds. We pulled weeds under the burning sun. We dug massive trenches to redirect water flows. We stood guard against swarms of hungry insects. We fought bloody, vicious wars with our neighbors just to protect a wooden box full of grain. The workload exploded overnight. We went from a leisurely 3 hours of wandering to grueling, backbreaking marathon of physical labor. From the moment the sun breached the horizon to the second it disappeared, we were bound tightly to the soil. The cage door slammed shut. The trap was sprung. The freedom of the wandering bands was traded for the heavy chains of a stationary, labor-intensive life. Our bodies literally broke under the weight of this new system. Anthropologists looking at early farming skeletons found an absolute disaster of human health. They found crushed spines. They discovered severe joint arthritis. They saw mouths full of rotting teeth caused by a new diet heavily reliant on sugary, starchy grains. The hunter-gatherers were tall, strong, and generally healthy, while the first farmers were shrinking, diseased, and overworked. But the psychological shift was even more devastating. For the first time in human history, we began living in the future instead of the present. The hunter-gatherer ate what they found today and trusted the forest to provide tomorrow. The farmer lived in constant terror of the next season. What if the rains do not come? What if a late frost kills the delicate sprouts? What if a neighboring tribe decides to steal the harvest? We invented anxiety, we created property, we drew imaginary lines in the dirt and died trying to defend them. Now look at us. Of course, we gained a few undeniable things from this massive historical pivot. Agriculture and the subsequent industrial revolutions built a world where most of us do not wake up terrified of immediate starvation. We built massive, brightly lit supermarkets. We strung thin fiber optic cables across the crushing depths of the ocean floors. We engineered complex machines that can do the physical labor of 1,000 sweating men. But the price we paid for all this comfort is astronomically high. We surrendered the ultimate human currency. We lost the total ownership of our own time. You traded the wild, dangerous freedom of the ancient world for the padded walls of the modern economy. But are you actually as safe as you think you are? You do not run from apex predators anymore, but your heart rate spikes every time your boss sends an unexpected message. You lie awake in the dark stressing over monthly revenue metrics, sudden market shifts, and the terrifying possibility of losing your income. You swap the fear of the tiger for the fear of the tax collector. The people who roamed the prehistoric plains were completely impoverished when it came to material objects, but they were absolute billionaires when it came to time. And us? We are the supposed winners of history. We grind away for 40 or 50 hours every single week. We exhaust our bodies and drain our minds just to purchase expensive things. Things we stack inside our homes. Things we barely even have the time or the energy to enjoy before the alarm rings and Monday morning rolls around. Again, what a spectacular, utterly tragic definition of progress.